Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Big Talks because we hate small talk. Again, we have Musa and Saudi here, and just to recap a little bit from last episode, last time we were kind of talking about me, kind of talking about my journey to Islam, and this time it's time for you to go ahead and give us your story. But before we get into that, I just want to thank everybody who's been listening into us, giving us support. You know, it really helps. And at the end of the day, our goal is to reach those who will benefit from this. So
Right.
if you feel like you're somebody who is benefiting from this, we want to thank you just for taking the time out to kind of listen. We hope that Allah blesses this project.
Yeah, I mean,
So in the meantime, let me just pass the mic over to my wife, and let's see what we got for this episode.
all right, so hey everyone, again, like Musa said, thanks so much again for your support. And I just want to jump straight into it. I was thinking really deeply about how I wanted to go ahead and introduce my story. And we already know that my story is a journey to Islam. So as we mentioned in our first episode, those of you who know me and who've kind of grown up around me or knowing about me, that might be something interesting that might cross your mind, wondering how could I even have a journey to Islam when I was born into a Muslim family. So I want to start with a question to everyone that's listening. This question is, of course, to Musa and myself as well. It's, why do you believe what you believe? Now, if you're someone who's a Muslim, you might be thinking right now, well, I believe maybe for many different reasons. You know, maybe you grew up in Islam, you learned about Islam, Islam seems to be the truth and such, right? If you're someone listening from a different faith, you might also be answering it in a similar way. If you're someone who does not believe anything, right, or you may think that you don't believe anything, I'd be really interested to hear kind of what your thoughts were in that moment when I asked that question.
Right, because me personally, just thinking about this topic and applying what knowledge I have, there is nothing that you think to be true that does not fall back on a belief. Right? There's no such thing as, and at least in my opinion, there's no such thing as I don't believe in anything. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to speak on something or anything at all or do something, it all falls back onto a belief. And if you go ahead and you study philosophy teaches that knowledge in general is a true justified belief.
Right.
So there's three angles to it. It has to be true, it has to be justified, so there has to be some kind of evidence to back up that claim. And also, if you don't believe in it, then it doesn't count as knowledge, because it can be justified and it can be true, but if you don't adopt it as a belief, then it's, to you, it's not knowledge, it's just something else.
Yeah.
So even to those who feel like they don't believe in anything, I would argue that you need to rethink that, because it doesn't matter. Even if you think that your parents are your parents, that's a belief.
Yeah, well, that's true. And, you know, it's part of the reason why I'm even posing this question to start off this podcast, is because as you're listening, hopefully as you guys listen through the podcast, it's something that I'm probably going to bring up more than once at different pivotal points in my journey to Islam. And it's something that I want you to consider for yourself. Because again, at the end of the day, our goal, or one of our goals at Big Talks, is to stimulate the mind and the heart through deeply contemplating and thinking about things. And one of the reasons why we are starting our introduction this way is because we truly believe that context matters. And so giving you guys the context of why we view things the way that we do is just an important part of starting our journey and starting our Big Talk series in general, to kind of have a better understanding of why we think about things the way we do, why we discuss them the ways that we do, and like that, those kinds of things, right? So why do you believe what you believe? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just hop into my history and my story and my journey to Islam, right? So I was born and raised into a traditional Muslim family. And growing up, my parents used Islam to guide us through. So they used Islam for their decisions in what they decided to do for us growing up. such as growing up learning how to read the Quran very, very young. I think I learned around the age of 5, alhamdulillah. Going to the masjid. The masjid is, again, the Muslim house of worship, for those of you who are not Muslim listening in. And wearing hijab when we reached a certain age, being involved in different activities. So they tried to center our lives around Islam. And they did, as far as I know, they did a wonderful job in doing that. Alhamdulillah, I think that they really maintained keeping a good example and being role models for us to follow.
Right.
When it came to character, when it came to just knowing about the deen is Islam, of course, and just trying to even apply it in our lives, right? Because there's a difference between knowing something and applying it.
Right.
And especially if you're in the field of education or psychology, anyone out there listening, especially for me, I understand that we have multiple levels of thinking. And, one of the things that I love to go ahead and teach my students, if any of you out there know that I am in the field of education, so I'm a teacher, I'm also a tutor and such, right? So one of the things that I really love to teach them is the fact that we have different ways that we go about really learning and understanding things.
Right.
And our brain can go really high up when it comes to our levels of thinking. So a lot of the time we might know something, but we don't understand it. And if we know it and understand it, we may not apply it.
Right.
And then it just keeps going a little bit more and more like that. So when I was growing up, my parents did a pretty good job at teaching us to apply it, and we knew a lot about it, right? However, at least for my own personal self, and I can't speak for my siblings at all, I found that there were times that I didn't truly really understand things, and I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily say that that was based on my parents or the way that they went about teaching things. I think that they tried their best, and they really did give us a lot of information and a lot of examples to follow, right? But at the same time, I found myself, getting older and kind of questioning things, feeling like I just didn't fully understand what was really happening, and I ended up kind of just thinking like, hey, I want to understand more about this, right? So in the process of feeling like I wanted to understand more about this, at the time, I guess being young, I didn't really try too hard to understand it, even though I wanted to understand it. I don't know if that sounds kind of silly, but maybe there are some of you out there that can relate to feeling that way.
Right. And, I also imagine that if you're feeling like you want to understand something more, there's like a layer of it where, because you don't understand it, you might not necessarily apply it.
Right.
So it kind of removes that what am I trying to say? Like, not necessarily trust in it, but like kind of like trust in it, where now that you have this feeling, I don't really understand this, the next question is, well, should I apply it? Right.
Yeah. Or even if you don't actively think about it, we just maybe sometimes find ourselves falling off of it because we don't fully understand it. So application kind of comes from two things. If you're someone that, is into psychology or even business, I'm finding in business especially that when it comes to implementing decisions, we not only need to have the information, but we need to have the motivation too. And so when we don't fully understand something, we may not find ourselves motivated to truly do it.
Right.
Or do it in the right ways. And a lot of the time we might find ourselves kind of just doing it purely out of habit, purely out of force, out of fear. And this is something that I find especially with a lot of young Muslim children nowadays working in the field of teaching and coaching kids, is that there's a lot of following going on and not a lot of actively choosing going on. And maybe this is something that's been going on throughout history. I wouldn't really be able to know because I wasn't there at the time. But when it comes to at least what happened to me and what's happening to kids nowadays, it's very similar. So as I moved on from high school into college, I found that I was still overall practicing Islam as much as I could. Definitely, I would not say that I was any type of perfect child, and sorry about that, Mom and Dad. But, I tried. I definitely tried. And I think most of us listening to this have tried. You're growing up, you're in your late teens, and you've been raised a certain way, whether you were raised as a Muslim, whether you were raised as a traditional Christian, whether you were raised as whatever you were raised as, right? You try to kind of fit in with what you were raised as. So for me, I ended up going to college, and when I went into college, I decided to study psychology. So as I mentioned in episode 1, my degree is in psychology, and I don't know why exactly I chose psychology. I know Musa mentioned in the first podcast that he reached a pivotal point in his life where he realized that everyone sucks. And again, that statement sounds like an absolute, and I just want to interject here saying right now that we don't try to make any absolute statements whenever we're speaking. We do speak in generalizations. Sometimes we may speak in specific terms, but we are going to try as best as we can to avoid absolutes. And we're also trying to avoid directly telling someone that they need to do something. This is kind of just sharing our journey, sharing our lens of the world, our worldview through our experiences, so that we can all kind of learn from each other and learn about each other and learn in general, right? Because life is a journey, and we're all traveling or traversing the same lands, so to speak, and we're all heading in the same general direction, but where we end up when we get to that end point is different, right? It could be different in terms of the choices that we make, in terms of whatever it is that really happens in our lives. So we're trying to avoid any absolute statements, but he did reach a point where he just felt in general that humans just suck. And I did reach that point. I felt that way to an extent, but I'm someone who very much values humanism and the humanistic perspective of psychology, which is that there's goodness in everyone, no matter what they've done in their lives. So we've got murderers, people killing each other, we've got rapists, we've got people that have done all kinds of terrible things, and even then there's goodness in this person, and there's hope in this person, and there's something in this person that could change. So I always held on to that view. That was something that I strongly believed in, and to this day I still strongly believe in it. I do have some tweaks and such that have changed that perspective a bit for me. It's not 100% in its pure form that psychology has it in. I use now an Islamic lens on that perspective. But I still believe that, there's goodness in people. So when I went into college, I did reach a point where I wanted to learn more about people, and I said, well, psychology just seems like a good field to get into, and, I'm someone that when I was 8 years old, I would sit by the window in our first apartment and kind of just think about death. And I came to this realization very, very young in my childhood by myself. My parents did not speak to me about death, especially my mom, being very sensitive and a very caring, loving person. That's something that's not ever really been easy for her to talk about or bring up. And I'll kind of just consider it and say, this life is temporary for all of us. And I came to that realization, that deep realization on my own.
So it's kind of this, even in Islam, there's this concept about how the only guarantee we have in life is death. And the Prophet ﷺ teaches us, think about the destroyer of I don't know why it's jumping in my head, but basically the destroyer of good things, the destroyer of our desires, the destroyer of our desires is death. Because at the end of the day, you're gonna die.
It's the only thing that we've been promised.
It's the only thing that we know for sure is going to happen.
So when I was trying to think about what I wanted to study, it was hard for me to really find anything that I wanted to study because I'm the type of person that just is interested in so many things and likes so many things that it was like, well, do I really want to do technology? Do I want to do science? Do I want to do health? Do I want to be a doctor, a lawyer, an artist, a this, a that, and whatever. And then I realized there's a little bit of psychology in everything. So I went for psychology. And as I started studying psychology and meeting new people, learning new things, I became the president of the psychology club at the college that I was attending. There was a lot of exposure that happened all at once, kind of like just a blast of exposure that just came upon me all at once at this certain point in time. And being someone, now if we just rewind a little bit, being someone who was already at the stage of struggling a bit with application due to a lack of understanding, I was easily influenced. I would say at that point it was kind of like, wow, there's so much out there that I don't know about. And I've mentioned this to Musa before, that when you grow up in a traditional religious family, you might end up in a position where there's this door, and the door has like bolts and locks all over it, and behind that door is everything else that you don't know. And all the different perspectives from the world, all the different religions, all the different walks of life, and everything that people experience. And It's like this forbidden door. And for whatever reason, I mean, it could be that your parents made it forbidden. It could be that your parents didn't make it forbidden and you made it forbidden. It could just be that it's something that you didn't even know about and it's just kind of sitting there.
Right.
And, that door for me was just unlocked, just like that. I didn't need any of the keys. I didn't need anything. It was just unlocked.
Right. And as you're talking about this, it's just making me think about this again. Like, there's truth and there's falsehood in the world, right? Mm-hmm. And truth is just apparent. And truth is kind of objective in a sense, and it doesn't change. Mm-hmm. So for a lot of people who find themselves behind this door, they're kind of limited in that sense. But if they lock themselves behind this door, it's because they're kind of afraid to see anything else that's going to destroy the way that they see things.
What do you mean in front of the door? Yeah.
In front of the door, right?
Yeah.
So, at the end of the day, truth is truth, and truth is truth regardless of what's going on. It doesn't change.
Right.
So, regardless of, again, what you believe, because we're talking about this idea of belief, if your belief is on truth, it won't matter if you go through that door or not. Mm-hmm. Because when you go through that door, truth is strong enough to deal with falsehood. It's going to be apparent. Mm-hmm. So that was just the thought that I had.
Yeah. However, as truth is truth and falsehood is falsehood, those things do still get filtered through our lenses,
right,
and our perceptions of the world.
Right.
So what you're saying is absolutely true. However, again, your lens impacts how you view that. And if you're walking through with subjective lenses, it's going to become subjective to you.
Right.
And so one of the things that we recommend highly, just from our own experiences to anyone that's listening, is to try your best to keep an objective view of what happens around you. Right. Objective meaning that you don't play your feelings into it, and that you try really hard to be unbiased and honest in the way that you view and experience things. And again, to a certain extent, we are always limited in our perceptions of this world to begin with, because we have been given senses and ways to acquire information to begin with. But we can still try our best, right, to be objective. And part of the reason why this episode is called My Illogical Journey is because as we go along in the story, you'll notice that I was not objective at all. I was very subjective all the way until the end, where I became a little bit more objective in the way that I viewed things, and that kind of transferred everything.
Right.
So little by little, I had all this exposure to all these things, and I started wavering deeply in my iman, iman being faith. I started wavering, extremely wavering, meeting a lot of people who, again, if you're listening to this and you're one of those people that I met during that time, I truly valued what everyone had to say to me. I truly valued and appreciated the fact that I met all these people and that I was able to learn their experiences and hear their viewpoints of the world. And I would never say that that I didn't value it or that it wasn't an important part of my journey. It was extremely important to me, and it was part of the reason why I even view things that I do now, because having that exposure and having those conversations, those deep talks with all these people from these different walks of life really helped me gauge how I wanted to view the world and why I believe what I believe. Okay. So again, why do you believe what you believe? So little by little I started drifting away from Islam and found myself not really wanting to practice, not really wanting to apply anything, struggling, with my parents at the time, kind of just wanting me to be a certain way, they wanting me to be on the truth, and wanting me to just be a good Muslim, right? Which of course, they would want that because A, they're my parents, so they love me more than anybody else. Sorry, Musa. B, they are Muslim. So it's natural that would be the reaction. And, of course, I wasn't trying to give my parents a hard time. I wasn't trying to play the fool. This was something that was genuinely, seriously happening to me. And this is something that I just found myself feeling very depressed at times, suffering from depression, suffering from anxiety. Nobody really wants to feel like they're not in alignment with themselves, right? I think one of the main goals that we have is to be aligned with our true natures and with what our soul, in Islam there's a concept called the fitra, and the fitra is like your natural inclination towards the truth, towards Allah. And so when you fall off from that alignment, it can feel like turmoil, and if you're someone right now listening who's not a Muslim, I recommend that it's something that maybe you look into a little bit or look within yourself and see, where's your alignment? What are you feeling right now in this moment listening to this? Right. So when I fell off from my alignment, it was like, whoa, what's going on? And you feel really bad about yourself. You start to feel depressed. You start to feel like you're just causing trouble for everyone. And, I'm like, well, I'm just disappointing my parents. I just suck so much. And what's my problem? Why am I even like this? But I carried on. I persevered in my journey. I carried on. And I, little by little, reached a point where I was like, you know what? Instead of just being so feeling-based and just following all of my feelings, following my desires, because I think that's something that I definitely should mention is at a certain point in time, my belief became my desire.
Right.
And it's like, forget about all this with how I think things truly are. It's more like, how do I think things should be, right? So at a certain point, it became from, what's the truth of the world to what's what I want. And at that point it was like, well, who cares about looking into the explanations of things? Who cares about, looking into the understandings of things? Mind you, I'm not saying that I actively thought these things at the time. Definitely not. I'm not that type of person. But even then, sometimes you may find that you act like a type of person that you're not, right? And so it became like my belief was now my desire and how I felt like my life should be.
Right. And, this topic of your belief becoming your desire, I think, again, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you do, what action you take, what you think, all of these fall back onto a belief. And that's just how the human being works. The human being works off of beliefs. And the choices they make, they're going to make choices based on what they believe. And I feel like a lot of people are probably in this position right now, right, where their belief is their desire. And by desire, I mean like what you want. Right. Like not a matter of the objectivity of the world, what the truth is, what's the true situation that you're facing. It's more like what you want to believe from the situation and what you
Exactly.
want to happen, what expectations you have of it, and you take that as your belief, which people will find themselves very disappointed at times when things don't play out the way they wanted, right? And I know a lot of people have probably gone through this where they wanted it to go this way, and then when it doesn't, they feel really upset. But that's just because your belief in that moment was not based on the objective reality of what's going on.
Of the world,
it was
of the
based
truth.
on your subjective reality, and which was what you want and what you felt about it.
Right. And that desire could be anything, you know. We're not talking about stereotypical associations of the word desire. We're talking about anything that you want, anything that you feel like it should be, right? And so when you're growing up and you don't have a solid understanding of your faith, you may not want those things. You know, there are many things, especially for women, in any walk of life, that the struggle may feel greater, just based on the requirements of women, or like, for example, even how society views women. There's a lot of culture that's mixed in to religions and walks of life as well. And when you don't even know how to separate those things, when you don't understand how those things are separated to even begin with, you may not want those things. Those things now fall outside of your desire of what you feel like should be your life, should be your walk. You know, you're like, well, I'm a woman, I'm an individual, I've got my own thoughts, I've got my own feelings, like, you know, why can't I be however I want to be?
Right, and you kind of have to check that, because not to say that what you want, what you feel, what you think about it is bad, but if it doesn't align with the reality, that's when you start finding problems.
Exactly. And that's where things even become illogical to an extent. Right? Okay, so I'm getting to that point, or I've already reached that point actually, and my desires became my belief. And when I reached the point of realizing that my desires became my belief, and this was, I'm going to say, a couple years into this journey, right? I'm not necessarily giving a lot of details, a lot of individual stories. I think that's something that if you guys are interested in, I can probably follow up on over time, you know, going a little more into depth into different situations that have happened, especially because I really would love to do a series for young girls, young women, which is something that I would probably go into a lot more detail about these things. Right now I'm keeping it just as an overview. But after a couple years in, experiencing different things, making some pretty bad choices, which I want to be honest with you guys, every next moment in your life is a choice that's waiting to be made. And when I realized that every next moment it's not just something that's just happening to you. You actively choose what happens in your life, right? And when I realized that, coupled with the fact that I was living a life based on what I desired, coupled with a lot of different events that happened in my life, things that literally threw me onto different roads and different paths, I reached a point where it was like, you know what, none of this makes any sense, right? All of this is illogical. And again, I'm the type of person that I'm very feeling driven, and I'm very caring. I look out for those around me. I try to be as selfless as I can. I try to stand up for the truth. I try to stand up for justice. I try to stand up for those who are in disadvantaged positions. I try to be an advocate for those who may not be able to be an advocate for themselves. And a lot of that does come from my parents and how they trained me to be. So when I realized that I wasn't making any sense, I was like, what? You know, what's even happening to me at this point? You know, and again, there were events that I'm not going to go into detail about, but there were events that really pushed me into this position where it was like an epiphany. And I was like, you know what? I can't just keep searching for what I want. At a certain point, I realized I need to search for the truth. And again, there were points where I did not even feel like I believed in Islam. There were points where I felt like I did not even believe in anything except that there was Allah, except that there was God looking out for me. and there were events that happened in my life that proved that to me as well. So I realized that I had a responsibility to actively choose what happens next. So I decided that I was going to go ahead and search for the truth and make sense of it too. So up until this point, I had reached as far as just not believing, right? And you would think that at this point I just jump right back into Islam and go ahead and start reading about, Islam and trying to practice that. That's not exactly what happened. Because again, as I mentioned, I tried to keep an objective stance. And so with that objectivity came openness to everything that did not seem downright evil. So, I'm not going to say, hey, well, Satanism was on the list. Definitely not. I think that if something seemed like, and again, this is not to say that there's pure evil in anything, especially like, for example, Islam teaches us that nothing is pure evil to even begin with. But at least from my viewpoint, I tried to be objective within a certain framework. So not objective to the point of going to anything that I thought was just openly harmful. But, there were certain things that I decided to research, certain things that I decided to study. Christianity being one of them, and some other walks of life, right? I can't say that I went ahead and studied everything. That would be just way too much. I don't even know if that's possible in someone's lifetime, just how much there is out there. But there were hand-selected things that I decided to kind of go in and try to be objective. So, studying Christianity and considering that, as we mentioned earlier, the United States is majority Christian, so it was not hard to find Christians to talk to. It was not hard to get my hands on a Bible. It was not hard to experience those kinds of things. And again, other walks of life as well, right? I'm just bringing up Christianity because it's pretty common. So as I started to study these things, Islam being one of them as well, they weren't done one by one, they were done in conjunction, just almost like comparative religion, so to speak. Trying to figure out, what exactly is the truth, right? Because again, you would think that I grew up in a Muslim household. I was just being a bit of a rebel, and then I decided, like, hey, let me turn back to Allah. That wasn't the case for me. And again, I think that this is something that is probably not spoken about very often, especially if you're a Muslim listening to this, if you grew up in a Muslim family. At the time, I don't even know of any of this happening to anyone within my own family circle, my close family circle. But it's not common for us to speak about these things. A lot of the time, maybe it's considered taboo. Everyone's afraid of the repercussions. Everyone's afraid of how someone's going to view them. Everyone's afraid of being misunderstood. And I am not really that type of person. So there's two things that we have to understand about being a Muslim, and I'm just going to add this in here. The first thing is that we need to have the correct intention, and we need to remember Allah in what we do. So we're doing it for His sake. But it's not just intention that matters. Our actions need to match with our intentions, right? And so that is what I'm putting into BIGtalks. What I'm putting in right now to you guys, and I'm being transparent with you, is that my intention right now in this moment is to put out this information for the sake of Allah, so that it can reach the heart or the mind of someone and influence them in a way that will help them, right? And I'm trying to match that intention with the way that I speak about it. So this is not, for example, me saying, well, if you're a Muslim right now, you should study other religions to try to understand yourself. This is not me saying that if you're someone that's struggling, well, you should check out this or should check out that. This is me more stating that you need to seek the truth to understand why you believe what you believe.
Right.
Your own choices and your own path of seeking your truth is yours. That's got nothing to do with me or my path or my way of going about it. My path and my way of going about it is really just to shine light on how or why I think about things the way that I do, and to also just try to give you guys something, anything that you can walk away from this podcast with, right? Anything. And then it's up to you to kind of figure out what you want to do with that.
Right.
So yeah, I did definitely start delving into all of these things, and it was not a simple case of me just losing Iman. This was me leaving Islam, right? And again, it's part of the reason why I think that difference needs to be put out there. And Allah is my witness that I'm not afraid, and I'm not like worried about how anyone is going to see me for stating that, because I think that is something that's just so important. And you know, when back in the day with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba, they weren't afraid. They had their own journeys. They had their own paths that they walked. And when they got to the point where they felt strong enough, it wasn't something that they hid. And I think that if there's anyone out there that may be experiencing something similar, if you're not, alhamdulillah, you know, but if you are, don't be afraid. You know, open your mind, open your heart to the truth, and ask for the truth. And be objective in searching for that truth, regardless of how you go about searching for it.
Right.
And that is exactly what I did. And so I started studying these different things. And I found over time that a lot of things did not add up. This is where my story switches from illogical to logical, because now what I really started doing was going ahead, and not only was I trying to understand things, I was also analyzing them, I was also evaluating them. And this goes back to the levels of thinking that we mentioned earlier. So as I started analyzing and evaluating and such, I found that there were just so many inconsistencies in a lot of different things that I was studying. I found some consistencies, and one consistency in particular that I wanted to mention across the faiths that I looked into, right? And I'm not making any absolute statements, so I can't say this applies to everything. But at least from what I researched, I found that there was a commonality or a consistency between all of them when it came to God specifically. And that commonality was that there's one God. And if you study comparative religion, or if you study just history in general, even if you're not literally looking into the religion aspect or theological aspect, is that even in religions that have multiple gods, you'll find that those multiple gods have one God, or one leader, or whatever it is that they consider it. And even from Musa's studies, he's been doing some studies on like African holistic health recently, and he found that even in the ancient African civilizations, the word God was used loosely. It was sometimes used referring to those who were in charge, sometimes referring to those who were most knowledgeable in a certain topic. People that graduated with degrees, they were specialists.
And just kind of diving into that just for a few seconds, you look into the ancient history, right? And this is just looking at an angle of history. And if you do decide to look into history, you cannot ignore belief. Right. You cannot ignore the religion of these people, because again, the decisions that these people made was based on what they believed. So you kind of have to throw religion and understand those beliefs. But it's kind of interesting to see how the deviations for this term God happened, and how it went from this concept of like, oh, there's an actual God, to suddenly people are God. Right. Because a lot of times, maybe like with the ancient Egyptians, it had to do with lineage. Mm-hmm. So they believed that they had a certain lineage, and that they were tied directly to that lineage of God. In which case, then you have to look back all the way to, okay, where is this lineage starting from? Mm-hmm. And then this is where information like how they didn't even use that term definitively. They used it loosely, where it's like, okay, well, perhaps it was just a matter of this person had this high level of intelligence, this high level of understanding, and therefore they deemed it in that way. Right. And oftentimes it's also in the translation, because in all honesty, it's not like we're finding these papyrus or these tombs or these like written history and it says in English God. We have to literally translate that word to what translates the best to what we understand.
Exactly, and we loosely translate it to that too. I mean, even the word Lord, if you know Bilal Phillips, he's written a couple of books on these kinds of topics as well. So I recommend just going out there and checking out his books. He has one particular book called One True Religion. I think that's the name of the book. I'm sorry if it's wrong. I just don't have it with me right now. Again, we just kind of talk during our talks. We don't plan it out, so I don't really remember the exact name of the book right now, but you can check it out and see if you find it. And he goes, and there's other books about this as well, where if you just study through history, you will find that there's that commonality in that God concept. And you'll also find that humanity in general did not start with the concept of multiple gods. We started with the concept of one God, and over time, like Musa just used the word deviated, and deviated meaning moving away from that concept of one God, and we moved away into the concept of multiple gods. And that concept of multiple gods, again, it just came from our belief in our desires, because we kind of just desired different things over the course of history. And maybe we didn't desire to have one God. Maybe we didn't desire to have one deity that was in charge of everything.
Right.
I'm not speaking absolutes here. And again, that's why I'm using the word maybe, because I don't know 100%. But that's something that you'll find from studying history, right? So going over the course of studying history, studying these religions, talking to different people, that was something that I found. And I was like, you know what? I do believe that there is one God, and this makes perfect logical sense. And again, we cannot disprove God. We cannot disprove God.
Right.
We don't have any logical way of disproving God.
Right.
We have logical ways of proving God, but we don't have logical ways of disproving God. So
right.
I was like, okay, la ilaha illallah. Right? I was like, well, I've reached that point, So now that I've reached that point, we're going ahead and looking more into these religions that claim that there is one God. So, and I just want to add in here, a couple minutes ago you were talking about the beliefs and the decisions, and again, I just want to reiterate that every decision you make is based on a belief. And I don't think that's something that we oftentimes think about. We always think that our decisions are based on the circumstances of the decision. So we'll look at a decision, we'll look at the extraneous factors that exist outside of us. We'll look at, okay, well, if I make it like this, this happens. If I make it like that, that happens. But we don't really factor in how we are believing that we see it. So I just want to kind of add that in there as something for you to consider, that your decision was not only based on what you saw could happen, but it was based on your belief as well. And if you disagree, then I welcome friendly comments in the comment section. Discussion, right? Formal, not formal. Well, it doesn't have to be formal, but I don't know what word I'm trying to use. Just keep it respectful.
Is good. Right.
Okay, so now let's look at Christianity, because Christianity was at the forefront of things for a while. And at a certain point, I realized that there was this overlap with man and God within the walls of Christianity. And considering that we've already reached the point of that there is no God but God, right, so to speak, the English translation to what I just said a few minutes ago, one and only God. So now that I've reached that point, it wasn't fully adding up for me, where I was like, you know what, this doesn't really add up. I found a lot of inconsistencies. And again, I know that a lot of you, if you reach this point in the video, which I hope you do, a lot of you may be Christian. A lot of you may either come from Christian households, or you may be a practicing Christian right now. A lot of Musa's family are devout Christians, and they're very, very sweet, good people. And I'm so happy that we found them. I'm happy we found you guys, if you're listening. But when it comes to the religion itself, right? Now, we cannot associate the truths of the religions and the not truths, but the facts of the religion, so to speak, with the people and how they apply it.
Right.
Those two things must be separated to maintain an objective viewpoint. And again, for the first half of my journey, in the first half of this video, one of the reasons why it was illogical was because my association with that was what I saw in people. and separate from my parents, because my parents were probably the only real good role models that I ever even had in Islam. And when I was young, of course. Now I've met a lot of, mashallah, I've met a lot of wonderful Muslims, and now that I've grown and experienced different things in life. But at that age, I hadn't really seen anything except my parents, which they were good. They were very good people, and alhamdulillah, they're still good people to this day. But other than that, the people around my age, it was like, what's going on? We were all bad examples to each other.
Right.
So that's something that needed to be separated. So if you're listening to this and you are a believer of a different faith, this is not about you as an individual or how you practice your faith, right? Because I would assume that if you're following a faith, you're trying to practice it to the best that you can. And that's something that's admirable. But when it comes to the actual facets of the religion itself, so when you're looking at the facets of the religion separate from the people, you're looking at the texts and you're looking at the history, right? The texts. So looking at those texts, I found lots of inconsistencies, and it was just not anything that truly added up for me, which really kind of strengthened the direction that I was heading in, because it wasn't just Christianity. At that point, practically everything had been eliminated except Christianity and Islam.
Right.
And Christianity was the weaker link of the two, right, for me, where it was just kind of like, all right, well, I can see, some truth in this. I can see that people are trying to be good people, they're trying to do good things and such, but again, if you're really keeping an objective, open, honest mindset, some of this stuff just didn't really make any sense to me. And I was like, well, we could just go ahead and take a leap of faith and be all beyond faith, so to speak, right? But then what?
Right, and what I've found, and I guess this is like kind of going back to my story a bit because I'm thinking about it, the things that didn't make sense, the things of it that just like, I'm like, okay, why is it that they believe this? When you look into why do people believe this, and again, this goes back to this central theme of knowing why you believe what you believe. When you look at why these beliefs existed inside of this religion, oftentimes it fell outside of the text.
Right.
It's not a matter of what the text itself says, it's a matter of how they tried to understand it, so they created something on the side to justify this. And if you go back on what philosophy says about what knowledge is, it has to be a true justified belief.
Right.
So they kind of fell back on the justified angle of knowledge, but was it true?
And that's the thing, those justifications are typically based on, or probably always, I don't know, based on desire. Right? I'll give you guys just a quick example because we probably should wrap it up. I'll give you a quick example. It was in my college days, I got my hands on a Bible, and at the time I was researching all the texts, so I figured the Bible was a better option than, Wikipedia. So I went ahead and got a Bible and all that, and I had this Christian guy in one of my classes that, he was a churchgoer. He actively tried to practice Christianity, and overall I would say he had a pretty good character. He tried to uphold what he believed. And I reached this verse in the Bible that stated that women must cover their heads. So I was very surprised because in Islam, we understand that we have to maintain hijab, and it's not just the head, but it's a certain level of modesty that we need to maintain, and covering different parts of the body and such.
Right.
So I went to him and I was like, I'm a little bit thrown off by these verses about covering women. We already know that Mary, peace be upon her, she was always fully covered, and historically speaking, even the way that we worshipped, we know that Jesus, or Isa alayhi salam, in the Bible it literally states that he would bow down, and his face, his prostration, his forehead would touch the floor, and all these different things. And just historically speaking, if you go to like the ancient civilizations, right, the ancient civilizations worshipped the same way.
Right.
So I'm already starting to tie everything back to Islam. Everything keeps tying back to Islam. And again, remember, there's two things. One, I'm trying to maintain objectivity. And 2, I keep asking God for the truth, right? Over and over and over. So now I reached upon this verse, and it says in the Bible, and it says that women must cover their heads, and they need to maintain a certain level of covering and such, right? So I was like, well, what's going on? Because like literally everyone I know doesn't cover their heads, and doesn't do any of this stuff. And again, you'll know about the Old Testament and the New Testament. If you're a Christian, you more than likely follow the New Testament, and it's something stated about how, back in the day, we were to follow the Old Testament, but after the coming of Isa alayhi salam, or Jesus, now we follow the New Testament and such. But again, it didn't make sense to me that the words of God just expired. This is not like a milk carton. It doesn't make sense to me that it expires that way, right? So I go to this Christian guy, and I ask him directly, I'm like, look, you gave me this, he's the one that gave me the Bible. I was like, so you gave me this Bible, I've been reading this Bible, and when I read this Bible, there's 2 things that I've noticed. Now, you already know that I grew up as a Muslim, right? Right now, I am lost. So you know that I grew up as a Muslim, and also we're living in a Christian majority country. There's 2 things that I've noticed. One is that no one does what this Bible is saying, these Christians, and 2, this Bible aligns more with Islam than what you guys do, right? And I was like, so what's going on? Like, I don't understand what's going on. And you're a Christian, you're a strong believer in your faith. Explain this to me. Why does it say that women must cover their heads? And I remember he kind of just laughed, so he just chuckled or whatever, and he was like, don't worry about it. That just means your hair. And I just kind of stood there in disbelief over a couple of things. 1, how little sense that made. And 2, the fact that he truly seemed like he believed what he was saying.
Right.
It did not feel like he was lying to me. And it was just in that moment where I was like, it hit me really hard that we do not view the world through objectivity.
Right.
We do not. It hit me so hard in that moment that most of us, and this might sound like a controversial statement, but most of us would like to believe that we really believe what we say we believe in, but the reality is we believe in our desires.
Right.
And I just could not believe it.
Right.
I could not believe what he said, and that was a pivotal moment for me where I was like, this makes no sense. This makes no sense to me, right? And it's something that I think that, regardless of what faith you're in right now, you need to ask yourself the question, why do you believe what you believe?
Right.
So at that point, I decided that I was going to go ahead and dive head first into Islam around that time period. It wasn't only that. There were many different happenings that occurred at that time. So I decided after a couple of years of being really, really inconsistent with going to the masjid, I would go ahead and go to the masjid. So I went to the masjid, and over my course of going to the masjid, there were lectures going on at the time that really, really, really solidified the logical part of faith, right? And I just want to put this out there that when you are someone growing up in a faith, a lot of the time you're told don't ask questions. You're told just believe.
Right.
You're told to take the leap of faith.
Right.
You're told to ignore the parts of the faith that you don't understand. And this is across all religions. You may find this, right? From different, but what I realized was that was the advice of people. That wasn't the advice of God. Right? The advice of God is, and especially if you're a Muslim, and I want you to know this if you're a Muslim, there's no such thing as blind faith in Islam, right? There is no such thing as blind faith. And I literally challenge you to go and research this. Because when I realized that there was no such thing as blind faith, I was like, that's it. I'm done playing games with this, right? This is not a game to me. Like, life is temporary. The only thing that we're promised is death. And if I could get as close as possible as I can get to where I think I need to be, not where I want to be, right? Then I'm going to try. Right. And I'm going to go against the odds, and I'm going to challenge myself. Do I feel comfortable with this? Probably not. But we don't always have to feel comfortable with something. We need to be seeking the truth, right? So now, up until this point, I went through the illogical aspect. I started introducing my own logic. I started, started gearing more from just following my desires and my emotions to, okay, now I'm going to reach the point of really being honest with this. And lo and behold, I end up hearing these lectures and hearing these talks that just kind of tie everything back into sense, like making sense, right? And at that point, it kind of just solidified everything for me, because I went in, I had the intuition, first of all, then I had the feeling, and I had the sensing, right? I had the experiences and all of that. Now all I needed was just the last piece of the puzzle, which was the logic, which was the understanding of it all. And that was when I found it. And the rest is history. I mean, we've got, the journey to Islam. We've got the journey through Islam. Something that we're planning on talking about is like choosing your beliefs a little bit more in depth, which we may kind of follow up in our next episode. But that was the point where I decided, you know what, I believe in this. I believe in Islam. And I just want to let you guys know that the greatest thing that has ever happened to me on this entire journey was understanding that I needed to choose it for myself. And this is something that we want to go into depth into our third episode, which we really hope that you guys will be tuning in for, is choosing your beliefs for yourself, right? Right. Regardless of what your belief is, choosing it for yourself. Because when I understood and I realized that I can not only say I'm a Muslim, but now I can say why I'm a Muslim, that was the greatest empowerment that I've ever experienced as a human being, right? Right. Not to use the word power loosely, but just within the limits of a human being.
Right. And it's not just a matter of having that reason, but it's like truly believing in that reason. Because I'm sure a lot of people these days can say, I'm a Muslim because Islam is the truth. Right. But when they say that Islam is the truth, if there's any bit of doubt in that statement when you say it, that doubt has the potential to destroy it. Exactly. Right? So it's not just a matter of saying I'm a Muslim because Islam is the truth. It's you really do have this belief and you can justify it. Right. It's not just a true belief. Right. It's a true justified belief. Right. And you have the ability to justify it if push comes to shove. If someone decides to challenge you on it, right, I can explain it.
And I mean, this goes out to anyone out there who is a Christian currently, or is an atheist, or is an agnostic, or is something else, right? Why do you believe what you believe? And can you justify it? And is that justification true? Right. Right? And that is something that will really that's what literally carries us through life, right? Because at the end of the day, every next moment is a decision waiting to be made. And our decisions can either be based on the truth or they can be based on our desires. And that belief that we hold is who we are. It's the lens that we use to view the world. Right. So again, for the last time, why do you believe what you believe? And if you find yourself struggling to answer that question, then the greatest advice that I can give you in this moment, or the greatest plea that I have for you, is to actively choose what comes next. All right, so I'm going to end it there. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this, and I hope that you learned something. Right. And thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.